Hello, multi-malicious Muppet Masters. I'm Ralphie. Welcome to the Bothy. Welcome to Ralphie Review 975. And a great big malt mention thank you to Martin Lucas van Erp. There we go. And what do I have for you today? Well, it's a bit of a disruption. I was planning a series of blended whisky reviews. And in my last review, 974, I reviewed the Thompson Brothers 6-year-old blended Scotch whisky. So a traditional Scotch whisky, but particularly good quality and a particularly good price. And I'm really struggling to find equally impressive blended Scotch whisky out there. And the reason is simple, that for two reasons. So there's two simple reasons. One, it's the fact that many blended Scotch whisky brands are now generic brand-led experiences that, in my opinion, don't have the same calibre of cask composition and quality that they used to have. Now, I know that's a bit of a sweeping statement, but bear with me. Put this side by side with the fact that we're now increasingly having single malt whiskies available to us, which are not that much more expensive than standard blended Scotch whiskies. So the blended Scotch whiskies are a little bit of single malt and quite a bit of column still, mixed mash bill, multi-grain whiskies, which don't tend to age in casks particularly quickly. And when they're corn-led, as many of these column still whiskies are, they tend to give you a kind of generic experience which is sort of padded out with just sufficient single malt component to give identity. And I want to share something with you. See, these days I find a lot of blended whisky actually quite boring. And after a few glasses, I just get fed up with it. The dynamic, the excitement, it's just not there that I find in single malt whiskies. And increasingly that I find in other spirits like Canadian and American ryes, and in particular Caribbean rums. But this is why, instead of having a 3-part blended Scotch whisky series, I've ended up just disregarding the 2 other blended Scotch whiskies that I intended to review, and I'm going back to single malt whisky. Not that single malt whisky is necessarily a superior experience, but it's more interesting in all its permutations. It's simply more exciting. So here we are. It's a bottle of Bunnahabhain. Bunnahabhain is generally widely available. It's easily recognised, and there's plenty to choose from. In fact, there's so much permutations of Bunnahabhain, and this isn't just restricted to Bunnahabhain, it's increasingly applying to a lot of single malts out there, that you get all these different varieties, that it in fact can become confusing, not just in terms of the official bottling varieties, whether it be sherry matured, bourbon matured, peated version, Manzanilla cask, Fino cask, port cask, Madeira cask, Marsala cask, Bordeaux cask, red wine cask, white wine cask. This situation is relatively new. In the old days, things were so much simpler, and I'm going to comment on that in some detail in Ralphie Review 975 Extras, which is coming up after this video. So I'm going to focus here on this permutation of Bunnahabhain, which is a non-age statement, really a younger version of the 12-year-old, which we tend to be more familiar with. It's where we kind of start with our Bunnahabhain journey. And this is the Studeradeur, right? And Studeradeur, they fortunately, it's not just you, by the way, it's me and it's everybody struggles with interpreting the anglicised presentation of Gaelic language, which is, in my opinion, done deliberately to cause confusion. But there we go, that's just a personal opinion. And it basically means the hang on, what does it mean? Steampunkers. I tell you, everybody needs a steampunker in their bothy. And means helmsman. That's what it means. And this is bottled at 46.3%. And as it says very helpfully in little gold letters in the front label, and I do applaud Bunnahabhain for this, natural colour, unchill filtered. So we're getting an integrity presentation of a whisky. And by the way, you can buy a bottle of this in the UK for less than £40. So in my opinion, it represents good value. And particularly compared to blended whiskies, where the majority of blended whiskies are bottled at 40%, very heavily chill filtered and have a load of caramel colour in them. This cosmeticisation of the brand. This is one important reason why even average bottlings, and I think this is an average bottling of Bunnahabhain, is more enticing to buy, simply because the quality of the delivery. It's bottled to deliver the flavour. It's bottled, the integrity bottling delivers the fullness of the experience that's actually there. And it's quite a full experience, although it has its shortcomings, which I'm going to go into shortly. On the nose, you've got that classic kind of syrupy, sultana, unpeated Islay signature. It's just exactly what we expect from Bunnahabhain as a single malt brand. It's kind of full flavoured, it's rounded, it's got some complexity to it in the array of spiciness in the background, including mild cinnamon, allspice, a little bit of ginger. And it's got that slight conserve note, as in slight jamminess, slight orange and ginger marmalade thing going on. It's distinctively sherried, and the quality of the sherry casks is pretty decent. So the nose gets you off to a really good start. However, when we have our first taste, it's a bit sharp. The initial development is sort of slightly umami, sour, citrus, and the finish is a little bit kind of flat and dry and tannic. So I highly recommend that once you've had your first few sips of this, you add a few drops of water just to open it up. You will be well rewarded, particularly when you give it some time. It doesn't carry an age statement, but I'm going to put the age of this whisky at 6 to 7 years old. And it gives you an interesting version of Bunnahabhain, but it doesn't give you the roundness and fullness of maturity that you get in the 12-year-old, and in particular, the 12-year-old cask strength, which is, in my opinion, at the moment, fingers crossed, still by far the best bottling of Bunnahabhain on the market. So this is really one for Bunnahabhain fans who like the 12-year-old experience and want to explore a permutation of it. And this is probably the nearest permutation to the original standard 12-year-old. I've added a drop of water, I let it settle down. It significantly helps. How much did I add? I added about 4 millilitres. So back to the nose. It's a good nose. In fact, it's a great nose. If you're a Bunnahabhain fan, you're going to be very happy with the nose. It's got what Bunnahabhain should have. It's got that signature. Good, strong, powerful, definitive signature. But then, when we come to give it another taste, water really, really helps. Really opens up the arrival. Sweet and sour. Lovely, sherried, a sweet style of whisky. Sweet and sour, with a little bit of tanginess, and it's got that kind of aromatic spice note. So you'll enjoy it. However, if you're going to consume this glass within 10 minutes, you will be perfectly happy with the result. It represents definitely good value for money. However, it's when you leave the glass a little bit longer, when you leave it sitting with the water in it, and you're in no rush to consume this whisky, what you'll find is that it comes across increasingly as a little bit young. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that initially everything's fine, but then it doesn't kind of hold up over time with the complexity and the balance. And this is really, really important. This is, if I'm looking for a key word here to deliver what I'm tasting in this whisky, it's balance. When a whisky is fully matured, it attains a balance. And this can happen at a relatively young age with active casks. And you see this represented wonderfully well with the likes of Springbank, where in fact the 12-year-old cask strength is by far the best version of Springbank out there, in my opinion. And this applies for other whiskies, whether it be Clynelish at 14 years old, which tends to be hitting what they call the sweet spot. It creates the balance of the event, of the whisky that we're investing in with our money. And when you get younger permutations, they're interesting, they're a little bit different, but if the maturation is cut short because they continue to use the same cask formula for younger versions of the whisky as they do for the older versions of the whisky, and not a lot of a price difference, then you start to be aware that you're tasting an unready and unrealised whisky. Now, it's enjoyable in the short term, but the novelty soon wears off. So let's go back to the taste and give you a little bit more of an analytics here. Nose, by the way, is fine. The nose works really well. The taste has a youthful sharpness to it, which is fine. But then in the development, you don't have the fullness of the development that comes from the additional years in the cask that you find in the standard 12-year-old. So as a result, the development kind of falls short. It's a shorter experience because it's a younger whisky, which, in my opinion, is just simply not quite ready. Now, the way that the producers could have got round that is by using a greater proportion of smaller casks and more active first fill casks to compensate for that, which is something that happens on a regular basis. And this is why when we're seeing new distilleries using quarter casks and mentioning quarter casks in their bottlings, as they do, for example, with Wolfburn, that we're attracted to it because we know what the messaging means. And it's the same with the classic Springbank Rundlets and Kilderkins series, which was an amazing version permutation of both of Springbank, Longrow and Hazelburn, because although the whisky was younger, the casks were smaller, and therefore the actual pace of maturation was accelerated successfully, allowing the youthfulness of the signature to remain bolder and more intact. Now, you certainly get the youthfulness of the signature of the Bunnahabhain in this, but it's kind of juvenile. It's, I have to say, immature. Not really badly done, but particularly if you know the older versions of Bunnahabhain, the 12-year-old and the 12-year-old cask strength, you're going to say, okay, well, it wasn't expensive to buy this bottle, but I'm not going to rush out and buy another. Why should I? In fact, where's that 12-year-old cask strength bottling that I got for a New Year's present or my birthday present? And what I'm going to do is, once the bottle level goes down just a little bit, I'm going to top it up with that just to boost the calibre of maturity. So this is one reason why we start to blend our own. So is that we don't have bottles sitting in the shelf that we quickly grew tired of, and then we've got to wait 4, 5, 6, 8 months, even a year before we come back to it, and the oxidisation process within the bottle has kind of compensated and broken down the youthfulness of that whisky and made it a little bit more rounded. So I'm going to give you a final taste before I present a mark here. I know this comes across as a criticism, and that's because it is. But there again, it's very common. I'm not just singling out, it's no pun intended, singling out the single malt from Bunnahabhain for any sort of, criticism here. This applies increasingly to a lot of whisky distillers who are, hello, hi sweetheart, you coming up? Coming up, up you come. You love the limelight, don't you? Right, could you get your tail out of the way, please, Fluffy? Thank you very much. Bit more, right-o. Yes, you've got a nice clean bottom. Right, I'm doing a whisky review. Can I just carry on? You don't need my undivided attention, do you? Lovely. Right, we're good. Now, where was I? Yes, I'm in the bothy, and I'm recording a whisky review for all the malt mates. Hello. Bunnahabhain are not alone in bottling young whisky. Ardbeg have been doing this with Arnabesht, and a number of other distilleries are doing it as well. And that's fine. These whiskies have their fan club. But when you've been a few decades around single malt whisky, you have a much more embedded point of reference in the memory banks as to what Bunnahabhain can be. And even another year in the casks would have made a big difference. But such is the demand and popularity of single malts that distillers can put out younger versions and they will sell. And one of the reasons they're putting out is so as they can get a cheaper price point for the product and appeal to a wider variety of whisky fans, particularly those who are budget driven. This is the reason they're doing it. So it's a perfectly competent single malt. And if you're new to single malts, you'll enjoy its freshness and its liveliness, and it's fine. It'll prepare you well, actually, for the more complex, more rounded event that is the standard 12-year-old single malt bottling. But for me, there's a little bit of a shortfall on what is actually a decent whisky. Sure, it's decent, but it's a little less decent than it could be. There you go. given time in the glass, it will open up quite nicely as the feistiness of the arrival settles down. And you get that kind of lovely, tangy, slightly boiled sweets thing going on in it. And sure, the initial reticence of the development into the finish will also settle down, and you'll get quite a pleasant marzipan note in the development. But then, the longer you leave it in the glass, which, to be honest, let's face it, not many people really do, it will kind of break down, it'll slightly disintegrate, and you'll get this sort of umami, sort of mineralised finish, which makes you go, ooh, I've enjoyed it, but ooh, I prefer the 12. So let's give you a malt mark for this. I'm going to give this a perfectly respectable, perfectly drinkable, no, I'm being a bit mean. I was going to give it an 80, but it's an integrity bottling, right? That really, really helps it. So I'm going to give it an 81 out of 100. And that, hang about, let's give a wee put out properly there. That's it. And that is a malt mark. Malt. Malt. Malt mark. So, I hope you found this review interesting. It's part of a series now of varied single malt Scotch whiskies that I'm doing for the next 4 reviews. Sort of available, better quality, decent, relative value for money single malt whiskies. And this is before I kick off my World Series. So thank you for joining me, but do pop back again for Ralphie Review 975 Extras, in which I will be talking about the 101 varieties syndrome that is now affecting quite a number of brands of single malt whisky. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it's just what it is, and I want to help you navigate it so that when you go out and spend your money in whisky, which I'm sure you do, you're more informed about the choices you're making. Okay, now, where's this Clyde clicker? And by the way, if you haven't subscribed, please do, so you get the updates and the notifications when I'm doing whisky reviews. Because I'm here to share the journey with you, share a malt moment, and of course, importantly, share experience so that you basically have a better journey and don't have so many bad purchases of whisky. It's important, and it's easily done in this day and age.